The Numinous Podcast with Carmen Spaniola.
Hi there, and welcome to the Numinous Podcast, where we have interesting conversations with everyday folks about the mystery of life. And every once in a while, I send you a brief missive, a little dispatch from here on the farm on Insilkshin-speaking territory, not too far away from a small town known as Summerland, BC. I'm your host, Carmen Spaniola.
I'm thinking a lot about barefoot doctors lately. I have this fascination with barefoot doctors. Okay, before we go any further, I'm not autistic, and I'm not saying that in any kind of way to imply that being autistic is I have any judgments around that. If anything, I maybe have a bit of romanticization, if that's a word. I romanticize autism in a way because I have this brilliant, artistic, sensitive, autistic child. And so, I have sort of blinky eyes of adoration, a very soft spot in my heart for that particular, quirky, pattern-making, observant, complex way of being in the world. I love it. And I've taken all the tests. I have autistic features, but I am not autistic. I don't pass any test. And I guess, one could say I have a spiky profile. I have areas in which people are like, are you sure? But I'm not. But I do get really into these wormholes. Same thing with ADHD. People will be like, maybe you have ADHD. Again, I've taken all the assessments. I'm not. I just, I have certain features, but I'm neurodivergent adjacent. Anyway, barefoot doctors, one of the topics I've been fascinated by for many years since I first heard about them. I think I was in high school because my high school sweetheart, my boyfriend, his mom told me about them. She had a fascination with China. She was always trying to say, instead of going to Europe after high school, you should go on a Kon-Tiki tour to the Great Wall of China. Eventually she did that. I was very happy for her to do that. Anyway, barefoot doctors. So I'm thinking about them a lot, and I want to tell you all about them because I think it's a framework for us to think about how are we going to get through fascism to something else. But before I do that, first, it's another episode of animals where they aren't supposed to be. So the horses have discovered, one of the horses discovered that the interior fence that they're in of their track system is not electrified. And once he figured that out, wouldn't you know, last night I went down to feed and a quarter of the fence had been destroyed. Literally, let me tell you about these three horses. I have a horse, Reverie. It's actually my kid V's horse. This is the one V chose. Imagine if Tom Petty was a horse. It looks like that. Literally, he's like a Cremolo with a white coat and very pale blue eyes and kind of red around them. It's not an aesthetic that's to my taste, but a lot of people really like this horse and say oh my gosh, it's a unicorn. Well, I don't know what it actually is. Reverie is a wild horse where in his herd, somebody let loose a fjord horse. So Reverie's, a mutt with fjord horse in him. So he's small. He's the smallest, and he's tough and strong. And he's smart. So in the pecking order, he's at the top because he's dominant and smart. And then next in the pecking order is Skaha, who in his herd, he's a wild horse, in his herd, somebody had let a Percheron loose. So that's a really big workhorse. But he's a Palomino, little blondie, very pretty. he's dominant, but he's not smart. And so he's second in the pecking order. And then last in the pecking order is Bo, who is my horse. Skaha, really, I got him for Reuben because he's big and tall and trainable. And Bo is lowest in the pecking order. He is not dominant, but he is smart. So what happened is Reverie discovered that the inside track was not electrified. The outside of the track is electrified, so they're scared of the electric fence, so they don't usually pressure test it. But the grass is starting to come up, the snow's all gone, the grass is coming up, and so Reverie was getting close to the pasture, which is in the inside. The grass is coming up, and he just got closer until he pushed against it, realized, oh, this is totally fine. And so the band of the electrical tape was was at his shoulders, on his chest, just like he was pulling a cart. He just pushed through, and the step-in posts, they're just plastic, but there's also metal ones. He broke the step-in posts, so they just snapped the plastic, but he also bent the steel T-post on either side. So that's how strong this little fucker is. So he just pulled it along until he got, a quarter of the length of this football field. And so Bo, the other smart one, just followed him. And so by then, the tape eventually just fell on the ground. They stepped over it. And Skaha, though, poor Skaha, big, strong guy, but not smart, was stuck in the track because he's had accidents with the fence before. And even though he didn't get electrocuted, it was this interior fence. He's scared of it because he kicked and bucked and he ended up cutting himself. So he was just standing on the track because he didn't want to step over the tape. And it was getting dark when I realized what was happening, and Skaha was getting anxious because Bo and Reverie were far away, and it's getting dark, and Skaha's not with his herd. So I spent 25 minutes last night trying to teach him it was okay to step over these two. Literally, they're half-inch white tape. But it's kind of good that he's afraid of it because we want them to continue to be afraid of electric fence. But anyway, he wouldn't step over it. So I literally had to find a log and drag this 10-foot log over and place it on top of the tape so he couldn't see it. And he literally stepped over it in 1 second. Anyway, so I guess in some ways he is a smart boy. Not so smart that he could figure out that something was wrong with the fence, but smart enough to not fuck around with the fence. Anyway, so they've all been out here on pasture all night. How you boys doing? Oh, look how happy everyone is. How are you doing, Skaha? Yeah. And so now, instead of finishing my office and doing stuff around the farm, Reuben is going to be making fence today. How you doing, Reverie? Good boy. I can see that they've been rolling around in the green grass because Reverie's face has grass stains on it. Hey, Bo. Is that good stuff? Yeah. Good boy. Okay, well, I'm going to make their mash and see if they figure out how to get out of here. So barefoot doctors, they're on my mind because I teach about them and that philosophy in my facilitation training. Right now I'm halfway through level 2. And for folks who are curious, I'll tell you right now, level 1 will be happening again this fall. There's no wait list. You just have to be on my newsletter. Okay, so barefoot doctors were a concept that became more well known or popularized during Mao Zedong's Cultural Revolution in China, which was a decade, it ended right after I was born. So it was like the late 60s to the mid 70s. And Mao Zedong, to be honest, again, I'm fascinated by him, but I find it very confusing because, or I have in the past found it confusing because there's been, his messages were so sort of self-contradictory. But now that America is living under a fascist dictatorship and we see the absurdity of dictatorship and collapse and the self-contradicting nature of it and the vicissitudes, the mercurialness, just the amount of contradiction and absurdity. It's like, oh, yeah, okay, so Mao is pretty run-of-the-mill kind of dictator because they say one thing, but they do another. So the Cultural Revolution, he was really promoting constant unrest and continuous revolution. And he promoted this idea of getting rid of old things, like old ideas, old culture, old customs, old habits, and encourage the youth to rise up and have armed struggle against elites and anyone who was encouraging a capitalist lifestyle or philosophy. But at the same time, he was adopting pretty Western. He was interested in modernizing, and also was hyper patriotic. So it was everything is for the country, everything is for the collective, everything is for the culture. Get rid of all the old culture and teachers and customs, but at the same time, extreme pride in the nation. All of the nation's creativity should be generated for the benefit of the nation. And it's sort of it kind of sounds like make America great again while getting rid of everything that makes America great. We're the country of freedom, while you actually start deporting people for no reason and making words illegal and making people's status illegal. And, so anyway. All this to say, I very much respect the barefoot doctors, but I recognize it can be touchy to talk about because they proliferated and were popularized under this fucking nutso dictator who, said one thing, did another. But let's focus on what's important here. What's important here is the philosophy of the barefoot doctors. So, okay, who were they? So the barefoot doctors were farmers and community healers. They were women. They were high school graduates who were important and connected and embedded in an important way in the communities. And what Mao did was he doubled down or really invested in this program that had been in rural China since the 1930s of sending these farmers or community healers to an intensive program to learn how to be a barefoot doctor, meaning learn how to do pretty much everything but surgery in your community. And Mao was noticing that young people were going away to Western institutions to learn medicine, to learn to be doctors. They were learning about vaccine programs. They were, implementing all of the rapid advancements that had occurred in medicine in the early part of the 20th century. And they weren't returning home to their native villages. And so healthcare, the workers really were, they were struggling in China. And since Mao Zedong's whole continuous revolution, keep the society constantly on edge and constantly involved in struggle and strife meant people needed to be healthy enough to do that. He really tried to create solidarity between students, workers, and soldiers, and sort of be like, okay, we are protecting the nation, but these people have to be healthy. Like, they have to be, abled. And because medicine was so poor and there wasn't preventative medicine and vaccines weren't getting out to the countrysides, he was like, okay, we got to do something about this. So he invested in the Barefoot Doctor program. These people who were farmers would go to a 6-month intensive program, and they would learn all about medicine. So they, as I said, they were farmers. They were also, folk heroes. Sorry, not heroes. Well, they are heroes. They're heroic. They were folk healers and, people who were capable and well-trusted in their communities. So they would take this 6-month intensive, then they would come back. They would continue to be a farmer 50% of the time. But the other 50% of the time, they'd go to people's houses and they would, administer vaccines. They were actually modernizing, one could even say westernizing, medicine. One of the reasons I say westernizing is because I read this amazing book by Xiao Ping Feng called Barefoot Doctors in Western China. And it's his PhD. So I bet when I bought mine, he was like, wow, someone else outside of my circle of 20 people I know have bought my book. I don't know. Maybe they teach it in school. Anyway, he's Singaporean, but he did this study of this one province in Western China where there were 4 generations of pharmacists in one family who had been operating. They'd been operating in the same location for 4 generations. And one of the things he was pointing out in his PhD is that, these people, the way that they had such continuity in their community also reflected how they needed to be flexible with the politics of the time. Because 4 generations ago, there was medical pluralism in China, where you would have doctors, you would have folk herbalists, and then you would have healers who he said would work in, what does he call it? Non-medical symbolic practice or something like that. In other words, they did spells, they did rituals, it was spiritual healing to assist with physical challenges. And so that had gone on for thousands of years in China, where you would have these different types of healers, and they were all legitimate. They were all respected. They were all part of the overall system of healthcare. And so during the Cultural Revolution, this is sort of what happened, is at first they, trained up people who were folk practitioners. They trained up people who were embedded in the community. They would, have pharmacists who would learn more, etc. But then what happened after the Cultural Revolution is you realize that actually they really professionalized or medicalized the healthcare system. And in fact, there was a lot less esteem, a lot less respect for the folk practices than there had been before, because they really doubled down on the hierarchy rather than it being plural. So where, herbalists and doctors and counselors, let's say, had all worked side by side with equal esteem. Now there was this hierarchy. And so, anyway, kind of interesting, kind of ironic. What we've seen in North America is kind of a similar thing where for a long time, there was so much yet to be discovered about medicine, and basically we went from having folk healers and practitioners to this more medicalized, professionalized system of healthcare and well-being. And we saw a huge spike in that after World War II. And partly that's because, not only was science, experiencing rapid development, but also after World War II, something shifted in psychology because people were like, what the fuck just happened with the human psyche that created the Holocaust? Like, how did evil proliferate so quickly and so horrifically, so barbarically? We have to figure this out. So where mental health was still kind of an emergent medical field, and we had spiritual practice, again, kind of like non-sacred symbolic representation, like the things we would do ritual, or we would be together in community, or you would have a wise person, or you'd have, intergenerational knowledge being transmitted to try to keep your psyche intact, to try to encourage mental health. After World War II, there's this like shock trauma in humanity, and then this hierarchy and the medicalization and professionalization kind of doubles down, because there's this like trauma response, like, oh my God, we have to control for this free radical. We have to control for this, wild card. So on the one hand, there's good things about that, because we want to have standards and we want to have accountability. But on the other hand, what can also happen is the backlash or the rise of anti-intellectualism that goes hand in hand with fascism, that seeks to keep us constantly in crisis, that seeks to try to create alliances between, soldiers or policing and the people, and if not alliances, then factions and war between them. So this idea of like endless war and constant struggle is good for dictators, right? Because the people are confused and they're exhausted and they're too busy fighting each other to revolt against the elite. And if you undermine the intellectual elite, if you undermine education, you can prolong the struggle. You can, it's easier to oppress and suppress uprising. So, barefoot doctors, why does this matter to me? Because barefoot doctors had this special thing that you can't really replicate through professionalization and medicalization, and that is relationship with community and embeddedness in the community and in the land. Literally farmers who knew exactly, what was happening seasonally, how crops were going, how survival was, how people were going to fare, literally trying to survive. They had their finger on that pulse, and they also literally had the finger on the pulse of everyone in their community. How is the health of this community? And they made do with what have. They did have apprentices, they did have assistants, but those people were also farmers, and they would only work with the barefoot doctor like 10% of the time. So there was like a network and a web of support, but their primary concern was literally the nourishment and physical well-being and survival of their community. So if you are a pharmacist who maybe started as an herbalist or whatever, 4 generations ago in a community. And governments are coming and going, and politics are coming and going. And sometimes they love what you do and hold you in high esteem. And other times you are a suspect. You are held in suspicion because you are an intellectual or whatever. You are having to learn how to navigate the politics and the interpersonal dynamics, the dual and multiple relationships of caring for community while also surviving yourself, and doing that literally over generations. And I think that's a good model for us. Part of what the Barefoot doctors do is, you could think of it as like a harm reduction approach, right? They want to ensure that they are not just providing service, but they are transmitting knowledge. They are cultural conservationists. So when they're trying to do that through the Cultural Revolution, they're having to do it in surreptitious ways, and they're just having to do the best they can, sort of doing things underground to ensure the continuity of knowledge transmission. So, in a harm reduction approach, we look at wanting to provision the people in our care with the same knowledge, skills, and information that we have. And we don't have a lot of time to do that. So we have to distill and sort of figure out, okay, first things first, back to basics. What's the most important thing here? It's kind of, we're triaging culture. We're triaging cultural conversation and trying to ensure that we aren't a knowledge gap. We aren't a bottleneck. We're not the only person who has this information. And so we learn something, we practice it a little bit, but we're instantly trying to teach it as well. We're trying to disseminate that knowledge through our relationships first. So I think in this day and age, we could consider ourselves all barefoot doctors on the front lines of trauma. All of us have to have trauma literacy. All of us have to have some political literacy. All of us have to have some intersectional analysis, but we don't actually have to be experts in those things. We really, really don't. We just have to have conviction that this is important, and we have to hold that vision of something that is bigger than just ourselves, that we know what our why is. So I'm really clear that I want to build the world beyond fascism. And I'm also really clear that collapse is happening, and that a collapse-aware approach means that, we make do with what we have. We're barefoot doctors on the front lines here. And we know that we have to go through the dissolution, the dissolving, the collapse of these systems in order to build something new. We're not going to be able to build what we want on the foundations of what we've been in. And so that's going to be really painful. But also, we have done this before. So in a collapse-aware approach, I'm always thinking, I think the future 100 years from now is probably going to look more like the world 100 years ago in some very foundational ways. You can talk about AI as much as you want, but until they talk about the limits to growth, the literal physical limits of the planet before tipping points, then it's an absurd conversation to be having. It's an absurd conversation to be happening. So I don't get distracted, right? We can't get distracted. Some things just are not possible. They're just not going to come to pass because they are not possible. If you haven't read Karen Howe's Empire of AI, I highly recommend you do. If there's a part of you that's like, but maybe, large language models or, generative intelligence will teach us how to live within the planet's limits with 8 billion people. No, it's not going to. It will consume itself and all of our resources is what I'm saying. It will consume us before it can get to that point. And even if it got to that point today, we don't have the social capacity to be able to bring those solutions about. In other words, the dictators have us so locked into continuous struggle that we won't be able to mobilize that quickly. So I'm not trying to be a downer. What I'm trying to say is, don't take your eye off the ball here. Don't take your eye off the prize. We don't want to build on those foundations. Those foundations are toxic. We want to build on their ruins, right? We want to build on something else. And so in order to do that, we need to seed those ideas into the future, just like planting seeds in the ground. And that's what Barefoot doctors are, right? They are farmers. They plant seeds in the ground for the future. Farmers, for all the stress they go through, have to be the most optimistic people because we keep planting seeds. And that's what the Barefoot doctors are. They are farmers who are triaging the culture and saying we have to be well, and we need to tend to each other and our relationships and keep our traditions and cultures alive, even as the those who would seek to destroy them seem to have the upper hand right now. We are seeds. So if you ever get a chance to read a book or watch a documentary about Barefoot doctors, I highly, highly, highly recommend you do, because it's so inspiring. It's so inspiring. And I like to think of moving towards medical pluralism again, where we earn our credibility through our embeddedness in place, in land, in stewardship, not only of the land, but of each other, rather than through systems of hierarchy and, systems of professionalism, etc., that are, actually, again, just like really quite capitalist orientations. So yes, we need to have, if I can use this language, checks and balances. But the checks and the balances should be community and scale and relationship and embeddedness, not necessarily, credentials you can pay for and earn, in a weekend without having to prove your embeddedness in anything. So I'm not saying we should completely do away with professionalism. It's just that people with extended education should also be able to, we should be able to have multiple channels that are all respected and held in esteem, and the guardrails are each other. And, there's room for lots of different ways to heal, and we need them in these times when capitalism has, privatized, even here in Canada, to get good medicine, you often have to go outside of our collectivist system, our universal healthcare, and the system itself is breaking. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit now, but I'm very excited about Barefoot Doctor approaches where we're just trying to equip each other with information, knowledge, skills, confidence, self-efficacy, ability, and the way that we ensure that we're doing this in a good and safe way is through embeddedness in communities, relationships, places. Because if you're going to try to be somewhere for 4 generations, you have to have a good reputation for integrity. And it's your reputation for integrity and care and reciprocity and service that keeps us safe. Okay, that's all I have to say about that, I guess. I feel like I'm not doing a great job of explaining the Barefoot Doctor philosophy. I just want to remind everyone I'm just out here, rapping to you while I'm getting the mash ready for the horses and stuff. So I teach better than this. Okay, this is just a dispatch. guys still want your mash? Come on, Bo. Skaha. Good boy, Bo. Good boy. So Bo figured out how to get outside the fence. He found a low point and stepped over. Probably, he is 14, so he was rounded up over a decade ago, and then he was trained in Western and dressage. He's done jumping and stuff, so he's not as afraid to go over stuff that's kind of scary. Whereas Reverie and Skaha, they've walked towards me, which is away from where they broke the fence, or Reverie broke the fence. And so now they're at the intact part of the fence, and they're like, I can't figure out how to get out of here. So this is me trying to be the Pied Piper and get them to follow me to where it's low and then step over. Come on, boys. Come on, Skaha. Come on, good boy. Come on, good boy. Yeah. Good boy, Skaha. Reverie's more headstrong and is like, I don't trust you. I need to figure stuff out by myself. I feel like Reverie is a Capricorn. He's just like my kid. Okay, well, I'm going to go put your mash out. And I guess Bo's going to eat it. Get their bowls of mash and see if I could coax them. The thing is, I don't know that I want to train them to step over the fence. But I do need to get them out at some point because Ruben's going to come and fix it. It's always something with these guys. The inside doesn't have a gate. It was just like a ring that we weren't going in and out of at this point. And I'm guessing that that's something Ruben will be implementing today, is an actual gate. No, this is not for you, Bo. Let's see if I can walk with a bowl of mash 100 feet without being attacked by a wild horse. No, that's not for you. Domestication is a funny thing because I want for them to feel free to choose. But at the same time, I have to be safe. No. Hey. Do you see me getting big with you? I know you're big. But I am bigger. Here I go. No. Whoa. I think you should think about that, friend. Yeah. Whoa. Good boy. Okay. That's it. Walk beside me. Good boy. Come here, Skaha. If you could see this, you'd be like, Carmen, you're crazy. Because now I'm in between two wild horses. You can do it. You can step over, bud. No, Bo. Back up. Good boy. Bringing the mash over has stressed everybody out. But imagine if you had two wild horses and then a line of masking tape, and they feel stuck on one side, and another wild horse who's with you on this side of the masking tape. And so they're kind of trapped inside unless we cut the fence. Or maybe Ruben and I could like try to lift the fence, this tape up over their heads, and maybe if they couldn't see it very well, they'd go under, who knows, but they definitely don't want to put their legs near it. Everybody's relaxing, and it seems like the two together are giving up on food. So I'm going to walk back down with Bo and just let him have it. He's been patient this whole time, being like, why can't I have that mash? I figured out the fence. Boy, you walk with me and you don't do anything until you hear the click. That's a good boy. Okay. Whoa, whoa.